Welcome to the Business Spotlight Series. My name is Kay Cote, and I'm your podcast host here at Action Coach in Central Texas. And today on the show, I have Victor Sauers II, founder and CEO of TKO Energy Capital, as my guest. And we're going to be talking all about his business, his journey to business ownership, challenges, and best practices that he's learned along the way. We're also going to give you a deep dive into what it's like to own and operate a business. If this is your first time on our channel, be sure to like and subscribe to get notifications when episodes like this drop. Welcome, Victor. It's so nice to have you here on the show today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, of course. Well, I'd like to dive in. Tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about your business.
Yeah, sure. I've been in the energy space for about 30 years. I've done 5 companies, sold 3, running 2. The one that's on topic for today is TKO Energy Capital, which is we work with funding. We work with large scale energy, either behind the meter or in front of the meter, which would be utility grid or large scale loads like Bitcoin, like a semiconductor fab, things of that nature. Whoever needs power and how do we do it, what have you. A lot of work in the regulatory world because it is large scale assets. And we also do a lot of syndicated funding for M&A type practices as well. And the other part we do is technology. We look for keystone technologies that makes a difference on an asset. So if you purchase an asset, what technology we can apply to enhance it, to add more value to that asset from a technical perspective.
Oh, wow. This sounds really like it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about. I'm really excited to dive into the energy section of things, but I'd first like to dive into a little bit about what inspired you as a business owner. When you first started up, think about your first start to your journey to entrepreneurship. What was that like for you? Have you always been called to entrepreneurship, or is it something that you stepped into?
So it really goes back to what your influence when you're young. I mentioned yourself as well, where what does your parents do or people that you respect when you're young? In this particular case, my father started his own companies. One of them was real-time systems. That was, I remember, young. So that was a partnership between real-time systems and IBM, but he's doing his own thing. Co-founder is all tech, uh, software company, what have you, in early stages. With that being said, I sold my first company when I was a little over 15, which was very simple. Uh, we made server cables. So branch off of what my father does, you work with, at that time, data centers. Data systems was reel-to-reel tape, right? Kind of like an audio studio, tape to tape, but that was data. But they needed cables, so we actually made custom cables, and I hired a bunch of my sister's girlfriends to do the pinout on these cables. So that's led to one thing. Eventually, I sold the company to Kay Cote, which is a big boy cable company. So I did that when I was 15.
Oh,
So from
wow.
Yeah. And then I got into architectural engineering, and then from there semiconductor in the early stages, and you had to deal with power. Both these ventures were doing very, very large industrial power. How does the utility work? How does the grid work? How do we even hook up to a fab? All those kind of things. You have to learn that kind of stuff from the customer perspective, talking to a regulated utility. So that was kind of interesting, going that journey. And then you learn some things where a utility is very archaic and that kind of stuff. It's a socialist type business model. So you have people on fixed income or a large uh, entity like a car manufacturer like Tesla or a Bitcoin able to service both without bankrupting either or. So it's very, very difficult and they're threading the needle every single day. So what can we do better? So we got on the asset side, the technology side, and one of the first things we did was getting energy storage regulatory body work done for ERCOT. So uh, and we did the same thing for PJM, which is another grid, 13 states, ERCOT being one state because it's so big. And the same thing with California, which we call a Cal ISO, understanding how if you're going to have energy storage to support renewables, if not other assets, then how does that entity get paid? It's a
Mm-hmm.
regular framework. And when we did it, the technology didn't exist. So EV vehicles, Tesla's mega factory for battery making in Nevada, that was being on the table.
Mm-hmm.
So the technology didn't didn't exist at scale to support the utility, but the utility wanted because at that time in the US, wind was growing so big. And how do you stabilize wind? It's not a 24-hour kind of deal. What do you do? So that's where that came into play. So we made the framework and we architect that rulemaking in ERCOT, PGM, and Cal ISO. So fun stuff like that.
Yeah, it's
So,
incredible.
well, you have to understand the how do you finance that? Uh, what missing technology? Who's willing to step to do technology? The GE, ABB, all the big players. Who's going to where we're going to go?
Mm-hmm.
And then what regulatory bodies where we can get buy-in, what we call stakeholders like Duke Energy, Luminant, PG&E, all the big 900-pound gorillas to get buy-in and say, yeah, this is a good business idea, not because it's green or it helps money, because it makes sense for the ratepayer. Because at one time in Texas, the grid was $80 at the wholesale per megawatt hour, $80.
Mm-hmm.
When we start adding wind, about 10 gigawatt, and that's about 200,000 homes per gigawatt or one nuclear power plant, the wholesale went from $80 aggregate average to $25 as of today. Right.
Wow.
So that's a good
Yeah,
thing,
that's a
but
great thing.
it's a handful because you're dealing with unstable power, right? And everything that we
Yeah.
have, as we're having this conversation right now, Texas is doing about 28 gigawatt of renewables, and California total load for the state is 27 gigawatt. So in other words, we're doing more renewables in Texas than California has load because we're 100 gigawatt load.
Wow, that is incredible. That's huge.
It is, and it's I mean Texas is a heavy industrial state since we're only 33 million people and California is 44 million people, but we're a giant industrial state. So how do you handle that and not blow the bank? Right now, California with EV charging at the home is 55 cents a kWh, a half a dollar,
Mm-hmm.
right? So as an example, a 1,400 square foot home, whereas mild weather, because most homes in California don't have central cooling like we do, like your home is right now,
Mm-hmm.
because the weather is very mild, but they still pay $1,200 a month in electricity bills.
Wow.
Another, yeah.
I couldn't imagine. I thought it was bad when I lived in North Dakota, let alone because of the winters,
Yeah.
it was the opposite. But wow, that's wild. Like I couldn't imagine. So like what does like your typical day to day look like as the, CEO of the company,
No,
you know?
a lot of this is things that have to come to my level at the C level,
Mm-hmm.
either from my board members, other C-level customers, where there's an issue coming up. Because usually at this stage of one's career, you're going to say, hey, you know what? There's a problem that requires a high level of interaction to be able to resolve.
Mm-hmm.
So versus my staff, and I have a great staff in all categories, right? So it comes to my attention, it's probably pretty serious, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other part is like just any other else in the C level, it's a lot of communication. It's communication like you and I are doing right now, and relationship building is critical. So for other business owners that listen to this is the key. Don't focus on what your product and services are. Focus on the relationship. It goes
Yeah.
much, much longer. So and we know I might have a 2-hour conversation with my peer who happened to be a customer and it's talking about the family, what's going on in the business, where his heartache is at, what have you. It's very personal. And
Mm-hmm.
5 minutes of business, right? Because
Yeah.
we know what to do. But companies that go south, either from startup or otherwise, is because the leadership emotionally is crashing,
I
right?
agree.
And
Definitely.
some days are great talking to these wonderful people who are running companies, either the Fortune 1000 startup companies, public companies, utility companies, and some some days, the same day, you found some just beautiful wins, and they're very excited about what they've done. accomplishments, and hey, we finally got the deal done. We finally had a breakthrough in technology. At the same token, you have the next phone call and somebody's getting a divorce and they're crashing and they want to quit the board, and it's just tragic. So too horrific,
Mm.
right? And
Mhm.
so when you do this long enough, especially in an industrial space with utility and industrials, there's not too many people. It's not like retail, millions and millions of people. Between all the leadership and utilities and regulatory and your large industrial assets, you might be talking about maybe 5,800 people, leaders. That's it,
Mhm.
right? So it's a small, small deal. And they're all human. And you have to be really to when you get that trust and they know you personally, you want to know. So it's more than just a product and services, right? So who do you go to when you're crashing? I imagine in your life you had a point where you're crashing, and who'd you go to? And lo and behold, it's a lowly little vendor called TKO. So you don't know, but it's earned that trust, right? It's
Yeah.
confidential, right? I had you have that conversation to say, hey, how do you pull out of that? Right?
Yeah.
Listen, right? Maybe a
Mhm.
couple of words of guidance, what have you. And and at this time you get invited to a board because the board and the C leadership are in conflict. That happens all the time,
Mhm.
right? So outside of doing services for on the technical side and anything that's energy tech is what we're into. Anything in energy M&A at scale we're into. Anything that utility related we're into, right? But along the way, between companies that are in the energy space, there's always conflict, right?
Mhm.
So, and it's really difficult for our clean tech company people to go from the idea to commercialization. And that's very, very difficult. That's why we have a 90% failure rate, because it's very difficult to go from a clean tech to sustainable commercialization in that period. It's very difficult. It's brutal. And when you go startup mode, here's the VC money, you're good to go, you're happy, uh,
Mhm.
you got some breathing room, right to the point where you say it's time to go to commercialization. That's difficult. So it's kind of like having your own little music studio and you're required to pull in 50 million a year.
Yeah.
Your eyes got big.
I'm
Required.
I'm in the music scene. I get it.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
when you have musicians and you have project managers and producers, well, you know what? They're looking at you to cut the check.
Yeah.
And people who a contract gets canceled or when your key members decides to quit, then you start feeling it. So in my
Mhm.
lifetime, I probably hired maybe about 2,800 people. At the same
Wow.
token, 82% of people who ever worked for me has started their own company. Because part of
80%?
being a business owner, you are a mentor,
Mm.
and you want to make your mentor to give them empowerment that they don't have to work for a W-2.
Mhm.
You can work for yourself, right? Have confidence, build your own company, have confidence. You know, it might be your forte, but I give them the tools, the experience, and the confidence that if you wish so, you'd be just fine. A lot of them just don't like it, but we're fearful to have that very first step. I said, hey, you've done this thing for me. I am no harder than you than the worst day you would ever have on your own. He goes, yeah, sometimes you're a real pain in the ass. I said, yeah, I am, but it doesn't get any worse than that. Right?
I love
That means
that.
you can survive. You'll be fine. And sure enough, they are. Right? But that's just
Mhm.
part of it. So you're building community. If you're a business owner, either a startup company, if you're retail, if you're in tech, you're building a company. And building that company is more than just the services and product. And
Mhm.
when you hire, and that's the biggest downfall from most companies, is how you hire. Hire slow, fire fast. Unfortunately, nobody wants to hear that other word, right? But it's the wrong football team, change it up, right? And
Mhm.
understand that we talk about you want to be a podcaster. So I'm gonna say, well, what's your background, right? Your education, your experience, what's your passion in music or other social media? Why are you comfortable in that? What have you accomplished? What was the difficulty? Not what you would do, but what you have done. That's what I want to know.
Mhm.
Where's your strengths and weaknesses? And when you had conflict, did you resolve it, and how did you resolve it? Right? Because every
Yeah.
single day as a business owner, there's a conflict.
Yes, there is.
So, so especially if you're pushing hard,
Hmm.
right? So, but
Yeah.
that's how you get results, right? And when you get results, yeah, so it's hard. So
Hmm.
it's but people say that I'm gonna go work for Amazon, or you can go work for yourself. So what happens if I don't make it? I said, well, the same thing. If Amazon has to cut people, you'll be cut, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, Dell just laid off 12% of their global workforce. 12%.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's a huge amount of people.
Oh, it is. And plus they were laying off senior people, been there a while, right before they got invested. Surprise, surprise.
Mm,
Right.
yeah.
So, but it does a W-2 job doesn't mean you're safe, right?
Yeah.
And if you really like your passion, because having it as a hobby will turn into a business, right? So, for me, like your first question was, I was never fearful doing my own gig because we were raised that way, right? And
Hmm.
so, and believe in personal improvement. What do you do to personal improvement year over year? You have 1 year to improve yourself in something. Don't
Hmm.
become stagnant. Don't become comfortable because you got 50 customers that are there for you every single month, right? To pay the
Right.
mortgage, all
Hmm.
right? Don't get comfortable. Challenge yourself, what have you. Surround yourself with wise people that have no financial interest in you. And it can't be your dad, right? People who give you the wisdom that you need and reality when you really need it, right?
Hmm.
So it's, you know what, that's BS, that's not right. Other times, hey, great job, you can do it, you can do it. So you're a cheerleader, but also a truth detector. And that's what you need. And it's really hard to find those people. A lot of those guys are retired executives, right? That's a wealth of knowledge and nice that hey, I want to pass along the knowledge uh for no burden on you, just help you out. And there's plenty of let's call it small group business advocates, right?
Hmm.
Something that you might know just inadvertently. Maybe your friend knows something. Hey, this guy, this is a nice person to know. That'll give you maybe words of wisdom. So if you're doing a business, either currently or want to, surround yourself with wise people. Because if you hold in yourself and you start crashing, you know what we do? We pull in, right? Close the door and don't talk to anybody. But please, I'm sure you have another question.
Yes, this is very insightful and very, very relevant to our listeners and as well as myself in this too. So what is your approach to goal setting? Like, how do you go about goal setting? Are you setting more than one or just focused on one, or how are you breaking those down?
Well, in my position, relative to um, a smaller company or a startup company, set the vision. And the vision has to be tangible to all the employees and all the clientele. So that's very key. And when you set a vision, you have to be willing to engage with all assets of your company, your suppliers, your programmers, your retail folks, whoever it might be that you deal with. So, I got like 6, 7 critical software guys, and they might be stuck trying to do a MATLAB, figure that out before we do hard programming, and I'll sit next to them. So as a leader, you might not be an expert in programming, but you got to know at the high level to help them out, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
fact you broke away from a board meeting to sit next to a programmer, right? So I know we were doing a solar site and actually drove up to West Texas and get a call from the site manager. He goes, "Hey, I think the game warden is come check us out." I said, "Hey, we got all your permits?" Said, "Yeah, that's okay." "Do you see that? What color is that truck?" He goes, "It's white." I said, "That's me." And I spent the day with the guys, and they don't know I'm the owner of the company,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but it leaves an impression. What kind of impression you want to live with your employees. And at our scale, where a lot of the owners say, I don't have time to have touch points with everybody. Well, no, but you can be intentional of that critical touch point. There's always there, right? We be thinking so much in the strategic, we forget about the tactical. And you're successful, your company's successful is because of your people and your vendors and your suppliers. That's why you're successful.
Mm,
So how do you nurture that? Something to think about.
yeah,
But
that's
go ahead. What's
well.
your what's your next question?
Well, now I'd like to dive into our rapid fire questions, which is 4 questions we like to ask, where you
Mm.
answer very top of mind, first thing that comes to mind to just get some of that insight and share some of that insight. So you ready for some rapid fire?
More insight. Okay, please.
All right. The first rapid fire question is, what is the key to success for you?
Be relentless. 100%. Don't give up. Don't doubt yourself. And you will doubt yourself, but don't give up when you're doubting yourself.
That's a big one for sure.
Hmm.
What is a piece of advice that you would give to another business owner?
Probably what I said earlier, surround yourself with wise people.
Hmm. And what is a book or piece of content, could be a podcast, anything that you've taken in most recently?
Hmm. I like educational type podcast. My time is small, so podcasts help a lot. And what's fun for me from a scientist, kind of AI, what's going on in the tech world. I listen to Lex Friedman, and he's
Okay.
very human. He's talking about a guy who's really bleeding edge in his thinking, but he's very, very human.
Hmm, like that. And
Mm.
the final question is, if you could rapidly improve your business in one aspect overnight, what would it be?
Mm. Let's see. Rapidly overnight. Well, I would say right now what we're working on is the acceptance of modular nuclear power because we can't afford to build out the grid anymore without harming people like you.
Hmm. Um, Writing that one down for sure. Well, thank you so much for answering our rapid fire questions. Before we wrap up with our final question for today, how can folks get in touch with you?
Let's see. They can probably look at my LinkedIn file. So you find it under Victor Sauers, and you find it under TKO Energy Capital.
Mhm.
And then it's constantly being monitored. So they'll get to me. Just do a DM in LinkedIn, and my admin will get it to me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing your contact info. Our final question for today, what is most inspiring to you today?
People, 100%. Working with people, watching them grow, watching them be successful. I want my other companies, my vendors, my suppliers to be super successful. And I
Mhm.
spend a lot of time, like I do my own employees, to help them grow, to give what we're having this conversation, words of wisdom, right? And so they can grow and also feel comfortable when they're hurting. They lose their credit from their bank. They need a new bank. Help them. Help your vendors.
Oh, wonderful. Well, this has been very inspiring. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your insight on the show today.
You are welcome.